Welcome. We're back for another episode of Coaches on Zoom Drinking Coffee. My name is Andrew Moss, and I am pleased to welcome Lauren Ammon to the show today.
Nice Hello. Oh, yes. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
Absolutely. So where do we find you today?
I am actually in Cincinnati, Ohio. So smack dab in the middle of the Midwest.
Very cool. And I'm not sure when this show will be released, but right now we're going through this COVID crisis. And we were just talking before we started recording about some of the implications of that on the kind of work you do. So maybe you could tell me what you do and what kind of people are you helping these days?
Yeah. So my history is in the HR world or human resources. So I spent about 15 years working with 5 different companies over that time frame, and really learning and diving into things like leadership development, employee engagement, culture, company culture, right? So really leaning in towards those sorts of things. And over the last couple of weeks, that's where my mind has been going as we kind of root through this COVID crisis and pandemic. And those, in connecting with some of my friends, we've started to call them, quote unquote, the other front line. And that's not to diminish anything that's happening on the healthcare side. It's more or less to bring a lot of attention to what's going on for those in the HR world and trying to navigate all this stuff that's just coming up because there's no playbook for it. And, they're being handed new regulations here in the US, and I'm sure other countries as well, as to how to really deal with this in the workforce. Because all of a sudden, one day we're all together and the next day we're all spread out. And so what does that look like, not only in terms of getting work done, but what does it do to company culture and leadership and those sorts of things? So that's really kind of where I've been spending a lot of my time during this pandemic, is to support that group of people.
That's interesting. So it must be a huge advantage to, have that background of knowing what your peers are going through, but also having the distance from it to be able to help them from afar and see things from a little bit different viewpoint. What are the big things that are coming up for them right now that maybe that they weren't equipped or weren't really prepared to have to deal with?
Yeah, and you make an excellent point. So in the last couple of months, that's where I've really transitioned, is going into a coaching practice. And some of the things that I've seen come up for those in HR is some people have been working for weeks and weeks on end without a break. And, just the mental exhaustion that comes with that. And I've also been hearing from some of my former colleagues in terms of really having to make tough decisions with very little information, whether it's in regards to how to get people from the workplace to their home, or oftentimes creating the RIF lists or the furlough lists or the salary reduction lists, and what that looks like and how they're making those decisions, and partnering with leaders in the business to make the best decision they possibly can with very little to no information as to what that looks like, or what it looks like now, or what it's going to look like down the road.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can definitely see it. So those tactical things are challenging because they haven't really had to do them at this scale in most industries for a long time. I would imagine there's a human element to this as well, and that much like we hear with our nurses and our doctors and our frontline healthcare workers, it's kind of like who's there to support them question. Is that similar in the HR industry?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm hearing, across the groups in my network, in terms of, thinking about who they can turn to answer, even sometimes just to talk to somebody, right? Because the nature of HR is so confidential. And particular at a time like this, when you're handling potentially who's getting riffed or who's getting furloughed. And oftentimes there's almost, you kind of go through all that, whether you're having the conversations with the employees, and then there's really no one to talk to. And so, they're in the moment of really supporting the person who's receiving, the not so great news. And then turning around to potentially having that exact same conversation within minutes with somebody else. And so by the end of the day, there's just that, what I've kind of started to call kind of that mental cloud of, not only are they carrying a little bit of their own emotion, but there's just that natural effect of somebody else's emotion coming over. And, what I've heard from a lot of my HR colleagues is that, who do I turn to? And that's where, from a coaching standpoint, I started to think, this is a prime opportunity to kind of open the doors of, hey, having lived in that space myself, let's just talk, let's open it so that you can at least release some of that emotional and mental murk that's coming up for you.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. It's a powerful place to be in terms of a place of service right now. So you had mentioned that this coaching is a somewhat new thing for you. So where did that come from? I don't know if you've seen the video with Steve Jobs where he talked about the dots all connecting when you look backwards sometimes, but is there a thread that through your career that makes it obvious why you're in coaching now, or what was the instigator for that?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. I don't know if it seems obvious, or maybe it does. To your point, if I go back and look at the dots. So when I was in HR, what I was really drawn to was human connection. And so really looking at it from a leader standpoint and an employee standpoint. So how do you foster that connection in a way that works for both of them mutually? And I always took the lean of everyone's an individual. And as an HR practitioner, I always tried to meet them as individuals rather than try to just apply to a policy to a person. I try to apply the person to the situation. And so when I look back, that is likely the thread that kind of pulled me through into coaching and allowed me the opportunity to really just work one-on-one with people to understand what it is where they shine and where maybe they have a little bit of mental or emotional cloud, and to, as a coach, kind of root through that, kind of take it off and allow them to shine, because I firmly believe that every person is powerful, resourceful, and whole. It's just that sometimes we get in our own way and we don't even know we're getting in our own way. So working one-on-one with leaders and employees specifically to foster kind of that human connection within the workplace, because we spend so much time there. And, we oftentimes say that our workplace is our second family. So how do we build cultures that allow people to feel welcome and included and part of the family versus potentially feeling ostracized or not part of the group or just going for a paycheck? Right.
And were there things you did when you were, a teenager or in university that kind of drew you to this path, or how did it all come about for you?
What my immediate answer would be, not that it seems obvious to me, but one of the things that I always go back to, so I was a swimmer growing up. So all the way from age 5 till I graduated from college. And I always kind of liken it in terms of, in swimming, it's an individual sport. So you're the one who's responsible for whatever you're doing in the water at that moment. But as a team, you come together and, you have your team results and your individual results. So I think that's kind of another thread that gets pulled through my life in terms of, being able to stand in my own space and be responsible for what I'm doing, but then also be there collectively in support of a team.
That's so funny because we have never talked about this before. But I was a swimmer for 20 years and a national swimming coach for 20 years.
Oh, no way.
For Canada. So it's because even when you were describing your HR approach, it's exactly the approach as a swimming coach working with a group of 20 swimmers of how do you make each of them feel they're getting an individualized program, but keep the whole program moving forward in somewhat organized way. So it's fascinating. It's kind of funny. I wasn't expecting to hear that, but so there are a lot of dots that connect then in the way that you look at your work and approach your work that would have come from that, sort of the solitude of being a swimmer, but then being part of a team, right?
Yeah, it's that, and you can appreciate this, right? So you spend hours on end staring at a black line, and the only thing going through all you have are your thoughts to either motivate you or at times work against you, right? So you're kind of in that, as you say, solitude, but then you're able to literally pop up and see so many people around you, and then really kind of come back to the root of, oh, we're all in this together. While we all have our own swim lane, figuratively and literally, we're all connected and we're all here for the same goal. And that's to not only have our own personal successes in whatever way that means for us, but then to also contribute to someone else's just by being a support system in that respect. And so, yeah, I mean, that ties directly into coaching and even leadership when you go into the workplace. So, yeah, I don't know that I've made that direct connection until this moment, but it's fascinating.
There's so many similarities. I mean, I worked at a national training center in Canada for a couple of years, and so we had 4 or 5 of the top athletes that swam the same events for Canada, training side by side every day. And it was a really interesting dynamic to have to manage that, because all of these, specifically we had a group of ladies that swam the breaststroke events, and they all had grown up with those posters on their bedroom wall of Olympics and and all these goals. And then every day the person that was in the way, or the 4 other people who were in the way of getting that goal, were right beside them. And I'm glad you brought up leadership, because it really was more about how you lead a group of high performers than the coaching, yes, was really important, but the leadership was super important, and how you managed that group, how much time you had those 5 together versus apart doing their own things. So lots of lessons learned. Did you have coaches in your athletic career then that were inspirations to maybe eventually wanting to go into this field?
Yeah, there were, if I really think back, there were 3 that I had that still stick with me today. And I had them from around age 11 to about 16. And so from a formative year standpoint and kind of that adolescent development, it's kind of no surprise that the 3 of them really stand out. And they were the 3 who really took the time to understand me as an individual, and more so not in terms of what my strengths were as a swimmer and where I excelled in terms of stroke or whatever the case may be, but they really took the time to understand kind of my mental makeup and what it is that really motivated me, and potentially what kind of prompted me to get in my own way, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah.
And so they were really instrumental in giving me grace. And by that, I mean, they understood that the hardest critic I had was right here. And so they were really good at tapping into that critic and telling her to shut up, move aside, and then just allow kind of the natural ability to take over. And so to this day, I mean, I saw one of them last summer at a swim meet. My sons now swim, naturally, of course, right? A former swimmer always has swimmers, right? Yeah. And I saw him, and we had a really good conversation, and it was almost as if, 20 some odd years hadn't passed, and he could still tap into me and really understood that even though I've grown and had so many experiences from the day that he and I were really close, he still knows me, and he can still talk to me and tap into that inner greatness that I have, that I didn't always let shine.
Did you find that gift that somebody had that helped you is a gift that you're now well skilled at giving to other people?
Yeah, and part of kind of how I approach it is that we all, my tagline is cloudy with a chance of greatness. And by that, I mean, we all have our inner superheroes on the inside, and we all come at life with the best potential that we possibly can, given to us by God, the universe, right? Whatever you believe in. And the cloudiness are just the things that we've imposed on ourselves, whether consciously or subconsciously, or maybe even unconsciously. And they start clouding our inner greatness. And as a coach, I approach it as, whatever you're going through is perfectly normal. You're not a bad person. You're not a wrong person. It's just that there have been things that happen in your life that are now making you cloudy. So as a coach, let's sit down, as a coach and a client, let's just sit down and talk through that. What is it that's getting in your way mentally or emotionally or potentially even physically or physiologically? Let's root through that, understand where that inner greatness stems from, tap into that, and we'll root through what's going on in the cloudiness, and we'll release it, and we'll move on.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's been a huge inspiration, actually.
Yeah, you can hear it as you talk about it. It's this idea, and I think we learn this as athletes, and whether it's sports or music or the arts, you know, we learn that there's greatness inside us. It shows itself somewhat easily sometimes.
Yeah.
Other times it's a real struggle to find it. But it's always there. And, you know, I work with a lot of former athletes and former Olympians and highly successful people who are trying to make big transitions in their life. And that's really the hardest lesson to get through and to have those insights and those breakthroughs, is that greatness that allows you to stand on, you know, the Olympic podium will apply in lots of areas of your life. It's just, you've got to redefine, you know, what greatness means to you. And you know, as you know, as an athlete, especially at an elite level, there's a lot of perceptions of how people see you that really hold people back, right? And they worry about those things a lot.
Yeah.
So it sounds like we operate in somewhat similar areas, and perhaps not surprising given our now knowing our backgrounds that that's the case. Yeah. Yeah.
You know, what do you, in that instance, what do you find to be the biggest challenge in that transition from top performing athlete to now everyday person, right?
I think it's having the patience to build a new version of themselves, right? In terms of, you know, they didn't become an Olympian in 2 years, so they're not going to become a successful entrepreneur in 2 years. And being okay with not being in the limelight, and, you know, other people perhaps perceiving that they're not really sure what they're up to and why are they doing that? What are they trying to do? And so it's getting past some of that, right? Is that, you know, they're so used to a certain kind of lifestyle where they've received a certain kind of feedback and things have happened for them at a certain pace. When you leave that context, you go into a whole new one. You know, it is restarting, but restarting with these gifts that you've got inside you that just need to be channeled and applied to the right things. So yeah, I think it's that. It's patience and believing that in the long term, everything, all these gifts you have are going to play out and be an asset to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's cool. So your coaching career now, like your coaching business per se, is just kind of getting started a little bit. Tough time to start a coaching business right now, as we know. But, you know, what are the different ways that you're, you know, experimenting with being able to serve people at a time when that's really what most people need right now, is just somebody to be there for them?
Yeah. Actually, I was having this conversation with someone this morning, and she was asking asking to dust off what my 2020 resolution was. And I said, well, funny enough, it was connection. And I said, actually, with the pandemic that we're experiencing, I'm finding it a blessing in disguise to be able to connect. So what I've been doing is just reaching out to my network, hopping on Zoom calls, just literally seeing how people are doing and allowing the opportunity for them to talk. And, you know, if that inspiration or the intuition feels right, you know, engaging in a coaching conversation just to allow some of that cloudiness to dissipate a little bit. And then just setting up recurring calls with them to say, hey, you know, how comfortable would you be checking in 2 weeks? And if they are, excellent. If not, and they feel great, perfect as well. And in those instances, you know, potentially just sending short text, hey, just checking in, how you doing? Sure. And, you know, my motivation right now, yeah, you're right. This is, you know what, 6 weeks ago, the economy was doing fairly well. And then here we are, you know, kind of toppled on itself. But just checking in and really just trying to genuinely see how people are doing. And if there's any way I can support them, letting them know I'm there with no strings attached.
Very cool. And so for the time being, HR support, HR therapy, if you want to call it that, whatever people need really to get through the months ahead. That's cool.
Yeah.
And are you doing any group things, or is it just the one-on-one, or how are you looking at that?
Yeah. So specific to the HR groups, I'm in connection with 2 of my colleagues, former colleagues. We actually are setting up weekly HR chat series and even branding it #TheOtherFrontline. And it's really a space to allow anyone who's in HR, whether you've got the title officially, or maybe you're a small business owner and you wear the HR hat because you have to, or you're a leader within a small business and you wear the HR hat because you have to. Technically, we all kind of do, right? You know, regardless of where you kind of sit.
Yeah.
And just allowing them space to take a breath. So over the next couple of weeks, we'll talk about mindset and allow kind of just space to feel okay that feeling overwhelmed or stress or exhaustion in this moment is perfectly normal, and to just allow some relief of that mindset. We're going to have somebody who is a consultant to the small businesses who don't have HR, and some of the things they could be thinking about or what resources might be available to them in that space. We'll have somebody who's from the human capital management software expert coming in and, you know, potentially teaching HR people who may not know the full functionality of what their systems can do, that might alleviate some of the tactical kind of everyday stuff, specifically when we're not together. And then anybody else, we're inviting guests, anybody, you know, to come on and really just speak to the HR community, just to give them a platform, and then provide ways for them to connect with people outside of their network who they feel, you know, connected to in some way, in order to foster more relationships and give them a little bit more support outside of their immediate network.
Yeah, that's great. That's really great. And how can people find you? As we'll probably wrap up, but like, I'd love to send a bunch of people in my network who are in the HR field your way. So how can people find the group and your coaching services? Yeah,
absolutely. So my website is unlimitedleader.com. So they can go there for information. And then I'm pretty active on LinkedIn and right under my name, Lauren Ammon. And I've been posting links to get registered for the HR series. I'm actually going to do so later today and then Wednesday, and keep doing that. So anybody interested can click on the registration link and get connected, and it'll register them for all sessions, and then they can make the choice to come in and out and whatever works for them, make it easiest for them.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, we'll make sure we put those links in the notes for the show.
Perfect.
And it's been great to connect again. We had a quick little introduction about a week ago, I guess, after we were on a panel together.
Yeah.
And it's funny how it makes sense why we connected, and I have a feeling we'll stay connected long into the future. We have very similar paths to this place. So yeah, it's great to have you here, and thanks very much for sharing some time with me, and good luck to you and all the other frontline workers out there, because you know, I know that the work they're doing to support employees and businesses is going to go long past the end of the health crisis. It's going to be rebuilding entire economy and bringing people back and making people feel trust in their companies again, and probably dealing with what does the future of work look like, you know, now that people have been working from home. So there's going to be a complicated time. So I think you're in a good spot to be able to support a lot of those people. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me. I love that we're connected on the swimming world.
Yeah.
And a little bummed that we won't get to see the great swimmers this summer, but we'll get to see them next summer.
Next summer. Yeah.
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 Well,
very
thank
good.
you so much.
Thanks, Lauren. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.